Whiting Ranch Regional Park in Southern California seemed to be the epitome of tranquility and safety. Thousands of people came here every day to enjoy the scenic trails and breathtaking views. None of them suspected that on this day, the quiet canyons would become the scene of events that would shake all of America. In these places, wildlife has always been next to civilization. People used to feel safe among these trails and canyons, believing that the boundaries between their world and the world of wild animals are clearly defined. But nature sometimes cruelly reminds us how illusory this boundary is, and how quickly a familiar walk can turn into a struggle for survival. On January 8, 2004, the trails of Whiting Ranch Wilderness Park in Southern California were filled with outdoor enthusiasts rushing to enjoy the last hours of daylight. The setting sun illuminated the majestic slopes of Red Rock Canyon, creating the perfect setting for an evening bike ride. Covering over 1,000 acres, this park is a complex system of mountain trails, canyons, and open spaces. Located on the edge of urban development, the park has become a popular destination for outdoor enthusiasts, especially cyclists attracted by the variety of challenging trails. One of the most popular bike routes was considered the Cactus Hill Trail, a technically challenging trail with a steep climb and rapid descent. The trail required a high level of skill. Any mistake could lead to a fall into the cactus thicket or the ravine that bordered the route. Despite its proximity to the city, the park remained a wilderness area. It was home to both herbivores and predators such as coyotes and mountain lions. Although encounters with large predators were rare, the Park Service regularly recorded their presence and warned visitors to use caution. On this day, 30-year-old Ann Yeller, a former Marine and now a successful fitness trainer, was riding the park's scenic trails. After serving in the Marine Corps, Ann has fully committed herself to bicycling, finding it the perfect escape from the urban hustle and bustle of Southern California. Despite working as a personal trainer, she had practically abandoned the gym. All her free time was now taken up by riding on mountain trails. Riding beside her was her close friend Debbie Nichols. Despite the 18-year age difference, they complemented each other perfectly on the trails. Debbie, being a mother and grandmother, was not inferior to the younger ones in speed and riding technique. Both women were members of Trail Angels, a sorority of women cyclists, though they preferred to ride alone, concentrating on improving their skills rather than talking. Ann had planned a short workout that day. She had just returned from visiting family in Minneapolis and wanted to stretch after a 2-week break. After hastily laying out the groceries she'd bought at home, she left some of the bags in the kitchen, planning to return in an hour. The Whiting Ranch route was perfect for this purpose. 45 minutes of intense riding should be enough to get back in shape after a vacation. As they climbed to the top of Cactus Hill, Ann and Debbie spotted 2 cyclists whizzing past them in a cloud of dust. A sporting excitement swept over Ann. She often used other riders as a reference point, tacitly competing with them. "Ready?" she smiled at Debbie, and they raced down the slope, following the figures that had disappeared ahead. Speeding down the slope, Ann kept her eyes on the road. Any mistake at this speed could cost her serious injury. Suddenly, she braked sharply. There was a man standing on the path, holding 2 bicycles. Slowing down, Ann asked if everything was all right. "I found an abandoned bicycle," the stranger replied. The situation seemed odd to Ann. There was no second bicyclist visible on the open plateau, which could explain the presence of the extra bike. However, accustomed to casual conversation on trails, she didn't pay much attention to it. Nodding to the man, Ann and Debbie continued downhill. Neither of them could have guessed that this strange encounter was a harbinger of the tragic events that would unfold here very soon. Continuing down the winding trail, Ann pulled ahead. The panorama from the small plateau caught her attention. Tree-covered hills and red rock peaks shimmering in the setting sun. Somewhere high in the sky, a hawk soared, its cry echoing off the canyon walls. It was at that moment that her peripheral vision caught movement in the thicket to the right of the trail. Something large and reddish-brown was rapidly approaching her. Her first thought was that it was a deer. Similar sightings had happened here before, but the reality was far more frightening. The next moment, a powerful blow knocked Anne off her bike. She didn't even have time to react. Her legs automatically released from the contact pedals as the massive body of the predator came at her from the side. As she fell, feeling the weight of the beast and its powerful claws digging into her back, she realized with horror that it wasn't a deer. She was being attacked by a mountain lion. The mountain lion, which weighed about 60 pounds, pinned Anne to the ground. The predator acted according to a script honed by nature. Its claws dug deep into the victim's shoulders as it tried to reach her neck. The fangs repeatedly struck the bicycle helmet that had so far protected Anne's head from the deadly bite. 4 years in the Marines had taught Anne to act cool, even in extreme situations. Hand-to-hand combat and critical survival training that once seemed routine at the Marine Corps base now became the thin line between life and death. Her mind, trained to quickly assess the threat, worked clearly despite the shock. Protect her neck, use her hands for defense, look for the enemy's weaknesses. Despite her training, the predator's strength was overwhelming. Anne tried to protect her neck by pressing her chin tightly against her chest, a technique her husband James, a martial arts instructor, had taught her. With her right hand, she tried desperately to strike the lion in the face, aiming for its eyes and nose, its most vulnerable points, but her blows seemed to have no effect on it. The power of the wild beast surpassed any combat experience gained in training bouts. Suddenly, Anne felt a tug as the predator began to drag her down the slope, the way big cats do with their prey. She realized that if the lion dragged her deeper into the thicket, there would be little chance of rescue. At that moment, she heard Debbie shouting, who jumped off her bike and rushed to her friend's aid. Debbie's scream of terror echoed through the canyon as she saw the mountain lion clawing at her friend. Without thinking of the consequences, she grabbed her bike and hurled it violently at the predator. "Let her go! Help! Somebody!" Her desperate screams cut through the air as she tried to save Anne, who by now could no longer scream. The lion had squeezed her throat. Debbie lunged forward and grabbed Anne's left ankle, trying to pull her friend out of the beast's death grip. A desperate struggle ensued between human and predator. The lion, weighing more than 60 kilograms, easily dragged both women through the thorny thickets, farther and farther from the trail. Scratching branches and sharp rocks tore at their clothes and skin, but Debbie kept her hands clasped together as she continued to call for help. Her cries were heard by a group of bicyclists. The 4 men immediately began pelting the predator with rocks, shouting and trying to scare the beast away. Stone after stone flew at the lion, hitting it in the sides and back. One of the cyclists, a tall man in a blue t-shirt, got closer to the others. Tearing off his helmet from his head, he, risking his own life, rushed forward and with force hit the lion on the muzzle with it. The predator, stunned by the sudden attack and the hail of stones, finally loosened his grip. Taking advantage of the beast's confusion, Debbie and the men dragged the bloody Anne up the slope. The mountain lion retreated into the thicket, but remained nearby, its yellow eyes watching the group of men carefully from a few meters away, as if waiting for the moment to attack again. Upon regaining consciousness, Anne couldn't breathe. Her throat was filled with blood from her many wounds. With Debbie's help, she sat up and tried to cough. Every movement resonated with sharp pain. The deep claw wounds on her back and shoulders throbbed, and her left cheek, she realized, was almost completely torn off. She held it with her hand, trying to press it to her face. Anne's condition was deteriorating by the minute. About 20 deep lacerations continued to bleed, soaking through her clothes. One of the wounds on her neck was particularly alarming, so deep that you could sink a finger into it up to the second phalanx. By some incredible coincidence, the predator's fangs had passed within millimeters of the carotid artery and vocal cords. One of the cyclists, because of communication problems in that place, could hardly call the emergency services. Another took off his t-shirt and handed it to Anne to stop the bleeding. The group realized the criticality of the situation. The nearest road was several kilometers away, and the predator was still nearby. After 19 minutes that seemed like an eternity, fire department paramedics appeared on the trail. The three-person team quickly spread out around the victim. While two began to perform the initial examination, the senior paramedic contacted dispatch. After assessing the severity of the injuries and the distance from the road, he immediately requested an air evacuation. Professionals acted quickly and methodically, but the extent of the injuries was of serious concern. Multiple lacerations to the neck, some dangerously close to the carotid artery, extensive facial injuries, and deep claw marks on the back and shoulders. The paramedics applied several bandages to the most serious wounds and began setting up an IV to replenish the blood loss. About 20 more minutes passed before the sound of an approaching rescue helicopter was heard in the sky. It was a medical Bell 407 from Mission Hospital, the nearest Level 1 trauma center. The pilot made several circles over the scene, choosing a suitable landing site. There was no more time for a detailed examination. The patient needed to be rushed to the hospital. 4 male bicyclists helped the paramedics transfer Anne onto a stretcher. Every movement during transportation could aggravate her injuries or cause more bleeding, but there was no other choice. The group slowly began the ascent to where the helicopter was waiting, constantly monitoring the injured woman's condition. The 10-mile trek to Mission Viejo Hospital took minutes. Once the helicopter doors slammed shut and the propellers began to gain momentum, the medical team continued the fight for Anne's life. In the confined space of the helicopter, they tried to stabilize her condition by constantly monitoring her vital signs and maintaining intravenous infusions to compensate for blood loss. A specialized medical team was already deployed to the trauma emergency room. Mission Viejo Hospital, a top-tier trauma center in the region, routinely admitted serious patients, but even for their experienced staff, Anne's case stood out for its seriousness. The doctor on duty, who had devoted more than 20 years to trauma work, would later admit that Anne's injuries were among the most severe in his practice. The patient was immediately referred for a comprehensive examination. A CT scan and a series of X-rays were to show a complete picture of the injuries, including possible trauma to internal organs and bone structures. Every minute counted. Doctors feared the development of complications due to serious soft tissue injuries. The results of the examination surpassed the worst fears of the doctors. 20 deep wounds in the neck area, with some wounds literally millimeters away from the carotid artery and jugular vein. The damage to the facial nerves was catastrophic. The 2 main trunks were completely severed, requiring immediate microsurgery to prevent permanent loss of facial expression. James, Anne's husband, arrived at the hospital. He was hardly recognizable. The always collected and calm martial arts instructor was in a state of shock. As the doctors prepared the operating room, he stayed by his wife's side, holding her hand and trying to cheer her up, even though he was struggling to cope with his emotions. As doctors fought for Anne's life, events unfolded at Whiting Ranch Wilderness Park that shed light on the tragic events of that day. The Park Service, in conjunction with Department of Fish and Game personnel, immediately organized a search operation. Their first priority was to locate and remove the predator that posed a deadly threat to park visitors. The search led the rangers to the very same abandoned bicycle that Anne had passed by. What at first seemed like a strange find on the trail now took on an ominous meaning. A few meters away from the bike, in a dense thicket, they found signs of a struggle and drops of blood. Moving further along these tracks, the rangers made a grisly discovery: the body of a cyclist. The deceased was 35-year-old Mark Reynolds, an experienced rider who became the first victim of the predator on that fateful day. Now the picture of tragic events began to clear up. The mountain lion attacked Mark a few hours before the meeting with Anne, and it was his bike she saw before her own collision with death. Experts, having studied the nature of the injuries, concluded that it was a classic mountain lion attack, a lightning-fast attack from behind, without a single chance for resistance. There were practically no signs of struggle on the body, which testified to the suddenness of the attack. By 7 p.m., the search team, using service dogs, had tracked the mountain lion about a half-mile from where Anne was attacked. Following safety protocol, and given the animal's apparent aggression toward humans, the decision was made to immediately eliminate the predator. The department's experienced marksman fired 2 accurate shots, killing the animal instantly. Subsequent examination of the carcass confirmed that this particular male mountain lion, weighing 62 kilograms, was responsible for both attacks. Human remains were found in its stomach, and claw and teeth marks exactly matched the victim's wounds. Local TV stations interrupted evening programs for breaking news. Reporters were broadcasting live from the park where the search operation was underway. News stories detailed the unprecedented case of 2 attacks in one day, interviewing wildlife experts and eyewitnesses to the events. Special attention was paid to the heroism of Debbie Nichols and the other cyclists whose determined actions saved Anne's life. CBS Los Angeles interviewed a Department of Fish and Game spokesperson who emphasized the exceptional nature of the case. There have only been about 20 confirmed mountain lion attacks on humans in California in the last 100 years. The incident at Whiting Ranch Park became the most high-profile case in Southern California in recent years, sparking a widespread public debate about safety in natural parks. In the weeks that followed, Anne underwent a series of complex surgeries. The first surgery lasted more than 6 hours. Doctors had to repair 2 major trunks of facial nerves that control facial expression functions. Dr. Nolan, who performed the surgery, did a filigree job of finding and connecting the tiny nerve endings, although he said it was like finding a needle in a haystack. It also required repairing soft tissue in the face and multiple injuries to the neck, some of which were several centimeters deep. Rehabilitation proved to be a long and painful process. The first 3 months were spent healing the wounds. Then began a long course of physiotherapy aimed at restoring mobility to the facial muscles and neck. Anne had to relearn simple actions such as smiling or closing her eyes completely. Each session was accompanied by pain, but she persevered. Throughout her recovery, her husband James was by Anne's side. His constant support and care played an important role in her recovery. After months of rehabilitation, doctors suggested additional cosmetic surgery, but Anne made the decision to leave her scars as they were. "Not a day goes by that I don't realize my facial scars, but I've learned to live with it," she later admits. 6 months after the attack, Anne surprised everyone with her decision to return to bicycling. She began riding the trails of Whiting Ranch again, including Cactus Hill, the place where the attack occurred. It became a way for her to prove to herself that fear could not run her life. Anne's story resonated widely, and soon she began receiving invitations to speak about her survival experiences. Reluctant at first, but gradually she became a sought-after motivational speaker, sharing her story with various audiences. Her speeches addressed not only the incident itself, but also the topics of overcoming trauma, accepting oneself, and the importance of support from loved ones. Anne Yeller's story is not just a case of a wild animal attacking a human. It is a story about the fine line between the familiar comforts of urban life and the harsh laws of wildlife, about how in a matter of seconds our illusion of safety can be shattered, and about what it means to truly fight for life. This story raises many questions. What would you do if you were in Debbie's shoes when your friend was attacked by a deadly predator? Would you risk your life? And what would you do after such an incident? Would you return to the same trails or leave extreme sports for good? If you like this story, support the video with a like. It will help other people to learn about this incredible case of survival and heroism of ordinary people. Subscribe to the channel. More stories about how people show incredible fortitude in the most critical situations, and about the fact that sometimes reality can be more exciting than any fantastic movie. What survival story would you like to hear in the next video? Write your wishes in the comments, and see you in the next episodes.